The wine hit him before he could move. $450 of Chateau Margaux. Cold, immediate. Spreading across the front of khakis while 200 people watched. She didn't even look at him. The adults are trying to work? Laughter rippled through the crystal ballroom. He smiled. Easy, unbothered. Picked up a napkin and pressed it against the stain like a man who had done something clumsy and was simply cleaning up after himself. Nobody stopped him as he walked out. Nobody said a word. In the elevator, alone, he took out his phone, typed 11 words, pressed send, and for the first time in 18 months, something loosened in his chest. Not relief, not anger, something colder than both. Because the woman who just poured wine on him in front of her entire corporate world had spent the last 4 years believing she married an IT consultant who made $73,000 a year. She had no idea she just signed over her company to her husband. The bottle cost $450. Damon knew that because he had been the one who ordered it, quietly, through the sommelier. 2 hours before the tentative, because he knew Dominique liked Chateau Margaux when she was celebrating. And tonight she was celebrating the biggest deal of her career. That was the kind of man he was. The kind who remembered. The Crystal Ballroom at the Peninsula Hotel in Atlanta held 200 people that night. Corporate executives, investment bankers, board members from 3 different firms, women in gowns that cost more than most people's mortgage payments, men in suits that were pressed so sharp they could cut glass. And then there was Damon. Khakis. A button-down from JCPenney that he had ironed himself that morning. A Timex watch his mother had given him when he graduated from Howard. Clean, neat, perfectly respectable if you weren't paying attention to the room around him. Nobody was paying attention to Damon. That was fine. That had always been fine. He stood slightly to the left of Dominique, which was where he always stood at these things. Close enough to be present, far enough to stay out of the frame. She was the frame. She had always been the frame. God, she was beautiful tonight. Dominique Webb stood at the center of that room, like she had been poured into it. Vi-body dodo, deep burgundy red, the color of old wine cut close and exact across every curve of her body. The kind of dress that made a room go quiet when you walked in. Her skin was dark and smooth and luminous under the chandeliers. Knotless braids pulled back at the crown, loose at the shoulders. Louboutin heels that she had been wearing since 5 in the morning without a single complaint. She was 38 years old and she looked like a woman who had never lost a single thing she went after. Which was almost true, almost. Damon watched her work the room. Watched her laugh at the right moments. Watched her lean in when Raymond Caldwell spoke, like his words were the most important words she had ever heard. Watched her sign the last page of the merger agreement with a pen that somebody handed her on a little velvet tray, like it was a crown. $800 million. Vertex Solutions, acquired by Caldwell Briar Capital. The culmination of 4 years as executive vice president, a salary of $680,000 a year. Stock options worth $2.3 million. A retention bonus that would vest in 3 weeks, right on schedule, right after this deal closed. Dominique had earned every dollar. Damon believed that completely. She had worked 80-hour weeks for years. She had sacrificed weekends and vacations and anniversaries and sleep. She had clawed her way up from regional sales manager to the top of a company that was now worth $800 million, and she had done it through sheer, relentless, brilliant force of will. He had just helped quietly with a few doors. She didn't know that part. The applause started when she lifted the signed document, clean and sharp and loud, 200 people clapping for his wife. And clapped too. He meant it. And then Raymond Caldwell, the CEO of the company that had just acquired Vertex, a man with a jawline that belonged in a magazine and in a handshake that felt like a business transaction, leaned over to say something in Dominique's ear. And she laughed, and the way she laughed made something shift in Damon's chest. Not jealousy. He was past jealousy. Something quieter, something that had been settling in for a long time. He reached for a glass of water on the nearest tray. Or maybe it was the champagne. He wasn't sure. What he was sure of was that his elbow made contact with the Chateau Margaux, and the Chateau Margaux made contact with the edge of the table, and then 400 feet of wine was traveling through the air in a slow and deeply inconvenient arc. It hit him. The front of his khakis, cold and immediate and very, very red. He heard Dominique's sharp intake of breath, and then her laughter, not the private laugh she saved for him. The public one. The performance. God, Damon. She barely glanced at him, already turning back toward Raymond Caldwell, already smoothing her expression back into polished and professional. You're so clumsy. I'm so sorry about him, she added, to the room, to nobody, to everybody. Go clean yourself up in the bathroom, okay? The adults are trying to work. The adults are trying to work. 200 people heard that. Some of them laughed, politely. The way people laugh when they're not sure if something is a joke, but they want to seem like they're in on it. Greg Tillman, standing 6 feet away with a champagne flute halfway to his mouth, did not laugh. He just looked at Damon with an expression Damon had seen before on people who witnessed something they couldn't quite name. Damon stood there for 3 seconds, wine dripping through the fabric onto the white marble floor. He smiled, easy and unbothered and completely empty. You're right, he said. I'll get out of your way. He picked up a cloth napkin from the nearest table, pressed it against the stain, walked toward the exit without hurrying, because hurrying would have made it worse. He kept his shoulders back, kept his expression neutral, nodded at a few people who made eye contact, said excuse me to a woman in a green gown who was standing near the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word. He was invisible, and tonight that was exactly what he needed to be. In the elevator, alone, Damon pressed the button for the lobby, watched the doors close, felt the hum of the cable beneath him. Then he took out his phone, typed 11 words to Sandra Okafor, execute the Booker clause. Vertex Acquisitions is signed and closed. He pressed send, watched the message deliver, put the phone back in his pocket, and for the first time in 18 months, Damon Webb felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, not satisfaction. Something more like the feeling you get when you finally set down something very heavy, something you had been carrying so long you forgot it wasn't supposed to be part of your body. He rode the elevator down to the lobby, sat in a chair near the window, ordered a glass of bourbon from a passing server. Outside, Atlanta glittered through the glass. He had built a significant portion of that city's financial infrastructure without anyone knowing his name. That had always been the arrangement, and for 19 years it had suited him perfectly. He watched the city and drank his bourbon, and let the plan do what plans do when you've spent 18 months making sure every piece is exactly where it needs to be. He thought about Howard University, about a dorm room that smelled like old textbooks and instant noodles, about his 22-year-old kid from Baltimore with a full scholarship, $60 in his bank account, and an algorithm that could see around corners. That kid was him. The man who first understood what the algorithm could do was someone else entirely. His name was David Booker. David Booker had been 60 years old in the fall of 2005, a partner at a small law firm in Atlanta with a client list that read like a who's who of black business in the American South. He had come to Howard for a guest lecture on contract law. Damon had sat in the front row because the front row was always empty, and the front row meant he didn't have to crane his neck to see the board. After the lecture, Damon had approached with questions about partnership structures. Booker had answered everyone, then asked 3 of his own. By the time the conversation ended, Booker had looked at this skinny kid from Baltimore with the scholarship and the careful eyes and said, "Son, you need to meet someone." The someone was Raymond Breyer. Raymond was 23, a Howard Jr. whose family had been building wealth in Atlanta for the 3 generations. He wore loafers without socks even in November and spoke about venture capital like most people speak about grocery lists. Casual. Like the details were so familiar they barely required full sentences. He had $12 million in family capital. He had connections in every boardroom in the Southeast. He had the kind of face and voice that made people want to give him things. What he didn't have was Damon's algorithm. The algorithm had taken Damon 14 months to build. It lived in a series of spreadsheets and models that tracked private equity opportunities across 17 different market signals, 6 months before those opportunities became visible to traditional analysts. It wasn't magic. It was pattern recognition applied with the kind of obsessive rigor that only comes from having nothing to lose and everything to prove. Raymond looked at it for 45 minutes. Then he said, "How do we split this?" Damon said, 60-40. Raymond said, "In your favor." Damon said, "In my favor." They signed the partnership agreement on September 3rd, 2005, in a conference room at Booker's law firm. David Booker notarized it himself. He had looked at both of them across the table and said something that Damon still heard clearly. 12 years after Booker died of cancer in a hospital room in Atlanta, success doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. Make sure when your moment comes that what gets revealed is something you can live with. Raymond had nodded respectfully. Damon had written it down. Caldwell Briar Capital launched in January 2006 with Raymond as the public-facing CEO and Damon as the silent majority shareholder, operating through a series of blind trusts and shell corporations that had been reviewed and approved by the SEC. Raymond gave interviews. Raymond attended conferences. Raymond had his photo taken with Centers and Fortune 500 CEOs. Damon built every model, made every major call, decided which companies to buy, which to pass on, which to reshape from the inside before anyone outside knew what was happening. By 2010, they had $400 million in assets under management. By 2014, they crossed $1 billion. Raymond had sent Damon a Patek Philippe watch with a note that said simply, "First one." Damon wore it exactly twice a year, his birthday and the anniversary of the partnership agreement. By November 2024, Caldwell Briar managed $4.2 billion. Damon's personal net worth was $847 million. He drove a 2015 Honda Accord, not because he couldn't afford something else, because the Accord got him where he needed to go, and he had never once confused transportation with identity. Dominique had thought it was charming when they first met. Later, she thought it was embarrassing. He remembered exactly when the shift happened. He just hadn't been able to stop it. Austin, Texas. April 2012. A tech conference on SaaS growth models that Damon had attended because one of the presenting companies was on his watch list. He'd sat in the third row, laptop open, taking notes that had nothing to do with the presentation and everything to do with the company's Q3 cash flow projections. And then the next presenter had walked to the front of the room. Dominique Carter, Regional Sales Manager, Vertex Solutions. She wore a wrap dress the color of sunflowers, talk-box braids, neat and precise, pulled over one shoulder. She stood at the podium like someone who had been doing this her whole life, and she opened with a data point that made half the room sit up straighter. Damon had closed his laptop. That almost never happened. She talked about SaaS growth patterns for 22 minutes, and she was right about things that most people in that room had known to look for. Not because she had read the right articles, because she had thought her way to the conclusion independently. He could always tell the difference. After the session, he had asked her one question. She had answered it, and then asked him a better one. By the end of the conference, they had talked for 6 hours across 3 different venues. She was funny, sharp, impatient with vagueness in a way that he found deeply attractive. She pushed back when she disagreed, didn't perform uncertainty to seem accessible. He told her he was an independent technology consultant, which was technically true. He did analytical consulting for Caldwell Briar. He just didn't mention the 60% ownership stake. He told her it was a test. His mother, Adrienne Webb, had won a $2.4 million settlement from a negligent employer when Damon was 12 years old. And the parade of men who had appeared in her life afterward had been educational in the most painful possible way. Damon had learned early and permanently that money changes the way people see you before they've had a chance to see you. He wanted Dominique to see him, she did. Or so he thought. They married in October 2012 at Piedmont Park. 40 guests, a minister who had known Adrienne for 30 years. A reception that cost $11,000 because neither of them saw the point in spending more on a party than on the life they were trying to build. The first 8 years were good. Different but good. Dominique traveled constantly. Damon worked from their home in Decatur, running financial models at 2 in the morning and cooking dinner by 7 in the evening, and knowing always that what he was doing from that home office was reshaping private equity markets in ways that would never have his name attached to them. He didn't mind. He had chosen this. He told himself he was happy. For a long time he actually was. Then came the EVP position. Dominique got the call on a Thursday afternoon in March 2021. Executive Vice President, Vertex Solutions. Damon had made one phone call 6 months earlier. A quiet word to Vertex's CEO through Raymond, mentioning that there was a sell-seater at the company worth paying attention to. He hadn't done it to control her. He had done it because she deserved the shot, and he could open the door without anyone knowing it was him. She never knew. She walked into their kitchen that Thursday afternoon vibrating with the kind of joy he hadn't seen on her face in 2 years, and she said, "I got it, Damon. I got the EVP." He held her for a long time. He was proud. Completely and genuinely proud, that was true. What he hadn't anticipated was what the position would do to her over the next 4 years. Or what it would do to them. It started small, the way these things do. A comment here, a glance there. The way she'd introduce him at company events with a particular brightness that was actually apology in disguise. "This is my husband. He's in IT. He consults for a tech company. He works from home," said with the tone of someone explaining away a dent in an otherwise perfect car. He noticed. He didn't say anything. He thought it was temporary. The salary jumped to $680,000. The stock options came. The business trips got longer. The dinners got later. She stopped asking him to come to events, then started bringing him to the ones where attendance was expected, and treating his presence like a complication she had to manage. Raymond had mentioned it once carefully at a Caldwell-Breyer board meeting. "She introduced you as the tech guy at the Vertex Gala last month to 3 of our portfolio company CCOs. Raymond had paused. They didn't know. "I know," Damon said. "Does it bother you?" Damon had thought about it honestly, not for the reasons you'd think. What bothered him wasn't the secrecy. He had chosen secrecy. What bothered him was watching the woman he married decide that his worth was a function of his visible income, watching her reclassify him from partner to liability without ever saying a word directly to his face. He kept thinking she would find her way back. People go through seasons. Ambition does strange things to people. He had seen it in business 100 times. The pressure of rising fast, the way it narrows your vision until you can only see what's directly in front of you. He waited, and then came March 2023. Tuesday, 9:15 in the evening, Damon pulled into the garage of their house in Decatur, having ended a video call that remained 40 minutes ahead of schedule. He could hear her before he opened the door from the garage to the kitchen. Her voice carried the way it always did when she was relaxed and comfortable and didn't think anyone was listening. He stepped into the kitchen. The lights were off. He didn't turn them on. She was on the back patio, the door cracked open. Sitting in the chair, she's like the glasses of red wine, and her feet tucked under her. The Atlanta night was warm for March. Her voice was easy and loose and full of a kind of laughter he hadn't heard her aim at him in years. He stood there with his cookies in his hand, in the dark, and he listened. "No, Diane, I'm serious," she was saying. "The moment those Vertex options vest after this Caldwell acquisition closes, I'm filing. Howard Finch already ran the numbers. Because California is community property, he's entitled to half of what I've made during the marriage, which is, I know it's infuriating, but thinks he can argue that my success was entirely self-made. Keep it down to maybe 400,000, maybe 5 if Damon's lawyers push back." A pause, laughter, dead weight. "I mean, he's sweet, he's us fine, but I need someone who operates at my level. Someone I can actually talk to about what I do. I come home from dinner with venture capitalists, and I'm telling Damon about term sheets, and he's asking if I want chicken or pasta." Another pause. "You should see how he looks at these events when I drag him along. Like a puppy that knows he doesn't belong. Raymond Breyer even pulled me aside once and asked if Damon was, I don't know, intellectually engaged enough for someone in my position. And I didn't even know what to say." Damon stood in the dark kitchen for a long time after that. He didn't move. His body had made that decision for him. He heard her laugh twice more. He heard her wrap up the call with the easy warmth of someone who felt completely safe. He heard the patio door slide open. She came into the kitchen and turned on the light, and he was standing there. She startled, then settled. "Oh, hey, I didn't hear you come in. Just got back," he said. "How was the call?" "Finished early." He set his keys on the counter. "How was your day?" She was already looking at her phone, already half somewhere else. "Just work stuff," she said. "You wouldn't really get it." "Okay," he said. She went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen alone. He was very still. The countertop was cold under his hands. He looked at the wine glass she had left on the patio table, still half full, and he thought about David Booker in that hospital room in 2019 in that week, saying to Damon, "The best contracts aren't the ones that trap people. They're the ones that show people who they really are." Damon went to his home office. He sat down at his desk. He opened a new document, and at 11:47 in the evening, he began to write. He wrote for 3 hours and 12 minutes without stopping. He wrote about Caldwell Briar, about the algorithm, about the blind trusts, about and the billion-dollar decisions made from a home office in Decatur, while his wife told her friends he did tech stuff. He wrote about why he had kept it hidden, and why that reason still felt true, and why it also didn't matter anymore, because the hiding had become its own kind of lie. He wrote about love, not the abstract kind, the specific kind, the kind that shows up in the details. The way he'd still remembered what she ordered at every restaurant they had ever been to together. The way he had stood in a hospital parking lot for 2 hours when she had a minor procedure in 2018 because he couldn't make himself leave until he knew she was okay. He wrote about what he wanted, which was for her to choose him, knowing everything, to look at the full picture and choose him. He finished at 3 a.m. He read it twice. Then he saved the document in a folder he labeled simply with the date, March 7, 2023. He did not send it, because sending it was a choice with a consequence, and he needed to be completely sure, whether she would find her own way back first. Whether the woman he had married 12 years ago was still inside the woman who had told her friend that he was dead weight. He wanted to be wrong. He was not wrong. In the morning he made hot coffee. He kissed her cheek. He asked about her meetings that day. She answered while scrolling her email, and when she left for work, she said, "See you tonight," without looking up. That evening, he called Sandra Okafor, not the next morning. That evening, he sat in his car with the engine off, and he made the call. Sandra picked up on the second ring, which was unusual for 11 p.m. Damon, Sandra, a pause on the line that told him she already knew what this call was about. They had worked together for years. She had structured every major trust and shell arrangement that held his Caldwell Briar stake. She knew his financial life with the intimacy of a surgeon who had performed the same procedure 40 times. "It's time," he said. "How long do you need me to build it?" He had already thought about this. 14 months. Maybe 16. The merger timeline. Vertex closes in 18 months if the current acquisition discussions move at their current pace. I'll accelerate from my end. Another pause. "Damon, are you sure?" He looked at the dashboard, the little crack in the plastic near the air vent that had been there for 3 years and that he had never bothered to fix because it didn't affect the car's function. "I'm sure," he said. "Then I'll start Monday," she said. He thanked her, ended the call, sat for another few minutes in the dark of the garage. He thought about David Booker's clause. Not the legal mechanism, not yet. That would come later, buried deep in subsection 14. 3B of an 847-page merger agreement. He thought about the principle behind it. What David had always said about the architecture of consequence. People reveal themselves through what they think is safe, make the conditions look safe, and wait. Damon had been waiting his whole life. He was good at it. He went inside, made dinner, ate alone, watched the news. When Dominique came home at 9:30 from a client dinner, he asked how it went. "Really well," she said. "They're moving forward." "That's great," he said. She smiled, distracted. "Yeah, it really is." She went to the bathroom. He washed the dishes, and in the silence of their kitchen in Decatur, with the ordinary sounds of a house that held 2 people living mostly parallel lives, Damon Webb let the plan begin. 18 months. Every door she thought she had opened herself, he had quietly unlocked 2 steps ahead. The Vertex position in 2018, one call from Raymond to the CEO. The mentorship from Patricia Morrison in 2021. A word at an Atlanta gala where Damon had attended as Raymond's guest and spent 40 minutes talking to Morrison's about Dominique's work before anyone knew he was there. The Series D funding that had elevated Vertex into acquisition territory. An introduction arranged through channels that led back always to Caldwell Briar. Dominique had earned what she built. That was true. He would never take that from her. But the stage he had built for her, in the dark, without credit, because that was the kind of man he was. The kind who remembered. The kind who built things for people who didn't know to look. And now, on a November night in Atlanta, with wine drying on his khakis and the crystal ballroom full of the sound of his wife's success, Damon Webb sat in a lobby cowboy chair with a glass of bourbon and waited for the world to finish catching up to what he already knew. It wouldn't take long. Tomorrow, Dominique Webb was going to walk into the offices of Caldwell Briar Capital for the first time as an executive of the company her husband had founded 19 years ago. and nothing would ever look the same again. 14 months is a long time to keep a secret. It is also, Damon had learned, exactly long enough to build something that cannot be undone. Sandra Okafor billed $340,000 over those 14 months. Not because the work was inefficient, because it was precise. Because every clause, every cross-reference, every buried subsection of an 847-page merger agreement had to be airtight in a way that would subscribe truancy from the best corporate attorneys that Vertex Solutions could afford to hire. And Vertex could afford very good attorneys. Sandra was better. She worked out of a corner office on the 31st floor of a building in Midtown Atlanta, where they held framed copies of partnership agreements and acquisition documents that had moved billions of dollars across the American economy over 22 years. She had been David Booker's protege before she became his successor. She had been present at the signing of the Caldwell-Breyer partnership agreement in September 2005. She had watched a 22-year-old kid from Baltimore sit across from David Booker and say 60-40 my favor, without blinking. She had known then. She had known the kind of man Damon Webb was going to become before he fully knew it himself. So when he called her from a dark garage in Decatur at 11 in the evening and said it's time with that particular flatness in his voice, she didn't ask unnecessary questions. She asked the questions that mattered. Timeline, structure, what outcome he was trying to build. And she listened to his answers with the careful attention of someone who understood that what he was describing was not revenge in any simple sense of the word. It was architecture. The Booker clause lived in subsection 14, 3B of the merger agreement. It was titled in the dry language of corporate law, executive retention and organizational stability commitment. 6 paragraphs, dense with cross-references, built to look like standard acquisition language because in many ways it was. Companies routinely included retention clauses. They needed their newly acquired executives to stay. They needed stability during integration. What was not standard was the specificity of what Sandra had embedded inside it. Any primary executive, and the definition of the primary executive had been drafted with surgical care in language that applied to exactly 3 people at Vertex Solutions, one of whom was Dominique Webb, who initiated legal divorce proceedings within 24 months of the acquisition closing date, would forfeit all stock options, all performance bonuses, and all accelerated benefits tied to the merger agreement. Dominique's total exposure, $8.8 million, her stock options, her retention sim, her accelerated Caldwell-Breyer vesting schedule over 3 years, $8.8 million. The moment she filed, Vertex's legal team had reviewed the full merger agreement over 6 weeks. 3 senior attorneys, 1 outside firm brought in for us opinion. They had flagged 14 items for negotiation. Subsection 14. 3B had not been among them, because retention clauses were vulnerable, and because the language was so carefully calibrated to the surrounding sections that it read as continuity rather than trap. Which was the point. David Booker had taught Damon that the most effective architecture is the kind that looks like it was always there. So Damon cooked dinner, and asked about her meetings, and watched the news on the couch 2 feet away from his wife, and carried that knowledge inside him like something very heavy and very cold. Something saying when she said goodnight when she went to bed before him, and sat alone in his office for another hour after, running models. 3 times, he opened the folder labeled March 7, 2023. 3 times, he opened the letter. The first time was in June 2023, 3 months after he wrote it. Dominique had come home early from a cancelled dinner and found him cooking, and she had sat at the kitchen island and told him about a negotiation she had won that day, talking fast and bright, the way she used to, and for 40 minutes she had been entirely herself, the woman from the sunflower dress, the one who asked better questions. He had gone to his office that night and opened the letter, read it through, thought about walking back down the hallway and handing it to her. Then she had said from their bedroom something into her phone, a work call at 10 p.m. Her voice had shifted back into the other register, the professional one, the one that didn't have room for him. He closed the folder. The second time was in February 2024, their anniversary. He had made a reservation at a restaurant they had gone to on their 3rd date. She had checked at 4 in the afternoon. Something came up with the Vertex board. Can we rain check? He had cancelled the reservation, eaten leftover rice, opened the letter at midnight and sat with it for a long time. Then he thought about what she had said to Diane on the patio. How she had laughed. He closed the folder. The third time was 3 weeks before the signing ceremony at the Peninsula, October 2024. She had come home from a pre-closing dinner with Raymond Breyer, which meant she had spent 3 hours with his oldest friend, who knew everything, who had sat across from Damon the week before and said, "Are you absolutely certain about this?" And Damon had said yes. She had come home glowing, energized, talking about how close it was, about what it was going to mean for her career. He had made her tea, sat across from her, listened, and somewhere in the middle of her talking he had thought, this is still her. This is still the twumte trot forsul to see and and because she mentioned offhand that she had never seen the Gulf of Mexico, and I wanted to be the one to show it to her. He had gone to his office, opened the letter, read the last paragraph. I was waiting for you to choose us. I kept thinking you would. He had closed the laptop. Not the folder, the laptop, because he already knew, had known for a long time. Was just still in some stubborn and irrational part of himself, refusing to stop knowing it. 3 weeks later, she poured $450 of wine on his khakis and told 200 people he was always in the way. And that was that. The morning after the signing ceremony, Damon was in his car by 7:45. He drove the 2015 Honda Accord to Caldwell Breyer's offices in Buckhead, parked in the private executive garage on the 4th sublevel, and took the private elevator to the 42nd floor. He had designed this floor himself, 5 years ago, floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, a conference table made from reclaimed Georgia pine, custom-built by a craftsman in Savannah who had charged $42,000 and been worth every cent. Original artwork from Black American artists purchased directly from studios, not auction houses. Damon had opinions about auction houses. The board members were already there when he arrived, all 9 of them. The people who actually knew who Damon Webb was. The ones who had signed NDAs so thorough that the NDAs themselves had NDAs. Former Fortune 500 CEOs, pension fund managers. A woman named Beverly Pratt, who had built and sold 3 companies before she turned 50 and now sat on boards, because she found it more interesting than retirement. They treated Damon the way people treat someone they genuinely respect. Not deference, actual respect. The kind built on 19 years of watching a man make calls that looked wrong until they looked inevitable. Beverly Pratt looked at him when he walked in and said, she really had no idea. None, Damon said, not even since a suspicion. He thought about it honestly. She had suspicion. She chose not to follow them. Beverly absorbed that. That's almost worse. Yes, he said. It is. Raymond was at the head of the table, which was where Raymond always sat in public-facing settings. He looked at Damon with an expression that had several layers to it. Concern, loyalty, and underneath both of those, something that might have been grief. You're sure you want to do this today? Raymond said. I've been sure for 14 months, Damon said. I'm not going to become unsure in the parking garage. Raymond stopped. She was good to you in the beginning. She was, Damon said. I know that. And you still Raymond? Damon said it quietly. I heard her on the phone. I've heard her every day since. This isn't about the beginning. This is about who we both turned out to be. Raymond nodded, looked at the table, let it go. The Vertex executives arrived at 9:55, 6 of them. All dressed for a first impression. All carrying the particular energy of people who had just survived a major acquisition and were now trying to figure out how to impress their new overlords without appearing to try. Nene was first through the door. She wore a burgundy bodycon dress, not the cis one from the night before. This one was structured, professional, hitting just above the knee. Her knotless braids were pinned back from her face. The Dior bag on her shoulder probably cost more than most people's first cars. She looked like what she was. A woman who had arrived. She scanned the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been walking into high-stakes meetings for years. She did not look at Damon. Why would she? He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near a Caldwell Breyer boardroom. Raymond stood to welcome them, said the expected things, gestured to seats, poured water. And then, when everyone was settled, when the pleasantries had been exchanged and the introductions were winding down, he said, before we begin the formal integration discussion, I want to introduce someone who has been fundamental to everything Caldwell Briar has built over the past 19 years. He prefers to work outside the public eye. But given that this is the beginning of a new chapter for all of us, he's decided it's time to be more visible in day-to-day operations. He looked to his left.
Damon, would you like to take it from here?
Dominique had been writing something on her legal pad, a note to herself about the agenda. Something about Q1 integration benchmarks. She looked up and saw her husband sitting 3 chairs down from her in a Tom Ford suit she had never seen before, with a watch on his wrist that she recognized. Somehow distantly, the part of her brain that noticed things before the rest of her brain caught up, as something that cost more than her car. She looked at him, looked at Raymond, looked back at Damon. Her mouth opened, nothing came out. "Good morning," Damon said. He stood, calm, easy. The same voice he used when he was explaining something he had explained 100 times before. For those who don't know me, and I understand that's most of you on the Vertex side, my name is Damon Webb. I'm the founding partner and majority shareholder of Caldwell Briar Capital. I hold a 60% equity stake through a series of blind trusts established in 2005. He pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The screen behind him lit up with a slide. Clean, simple. It's the ownership structure of Caldwell Briar Capital. Every trust, every entity. His name at the top of it connected to everything. I've been involved in every major acquisition this firm made over 19 years, he continued, including the decision to acquire Vertex Solutions. The room was very quiet. Greg Tillman, sitting 2 seats from Dominique, leaned slightly toward her. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Is that your husband?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Damon walked through it methodically. The history, the structure, the investment philosophy that had grown Caldwell Briar $12 million in seed capital to $4.2 billion in assets under management. He was good at this. He was, in fact, extraordinary at this. The board members around the table contributed occasional context, the comfortable shorthand of people who had been in rooms like this together for years. The Vertex executives sat very still. Greg Tillman had stopped taking notes somewhere around the 3rd slide, and Dominique sat with her hands flat on the table and her legal pad in front of her and her pen hovering 1 inch above the paper, not moving. Her face had done something complicated, started at confusion, passed through shock, landed somewhere that didn't have a clean name. Damon advanced to the last slide. "One final item before we move into integration planning," he said. His voice hadn't changed, not by a single degree. "The merger agreement you all signed includes a standard executive retention commitment in subsection 14, 3B. I want to make sure everyone on the Vertex leadership team has a clear understanding of what that commitment entails." He read it, not the full clause, just the relevant section. The part about divorce proceedings, the part about forfeiture, the part about the 24-month win. He did not look at Dominique while he read it. He didn't need to. He could feel her. "This is standard acquisition language," he said. "Companies need stability during integration. I want to make sure we're all aligned on the timeline and the expectations." He set down the remote. "Other questions?" Silence. Then Greg Tillman raised his hand halfway, then put it down, then raised it again. "I thought you were." He stopped. Started again. "At the signing last night. A JCPenney shirt, Damon." Said yes. "So you were introduced as my wife's husband, who does .T consulting." He let that land, both technically accurate. Nobody laughed. Raymond called a coffee break at 11:30. The room cleared with unusual speed. The Vertex executives moved into the hallway in a cluster, the specific cluster of people who have just witnessed something they collectively need to process and are not yet sure whether they're allowed to say what they're thinking out loud. Damon was gathering his notes when Dominique appeared at his elbow. "Your office," she said. "Or mine." Her voice was controlled, barely. "I have one on 45, he said. Come on, he had not been in this office in 3 months. It looked exactly as he had left it. Zebrawood desk, Italian leather sofa, dark brown, built-in bookshelves with books that were actually read. A window that covered the entire east wall and showed Atlanta spreading out in every direction. Glass and green and highway, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. Dominique walked in and stood in the middle of the room and looked at it like she was trying to recalibrate everything she knew about the past 12 years through the lens of a space she had never been invited into. She turned to face him. "How long?" she said. 10 years, he said. Since before I didn't you tell me? Not an accusation of questions clothes. At first, he said, because I needed to know you loved me for me. My mother spent years watching men see her settlement money before they saw her. I grew up understanding that kind of damage. He sat on the edge of his desk, not aggressive, just settled. Then the years passed and your career took off and I realized I liked being in the background. I liked watching you succeed. You liked watching me. She stopped. Started again, Damon. I have been telling people you make $73,000 a year doing tech consulting. I have been. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. I told Raymond Breyer once that you weren't, that you didn't. That I wasn't intellectually engaged enough for someone your caliber, Damon said. Raymond told me. She went very still. He picked up his phone, found the recording app, pressed play. Her own voice filled the office. Damon is dead weight. Has been for years. Howard Finch thinks we can keep his settlement down to $400,000. So I need someone who operates at my level. He let it run for 45 seconds. Then stopped it. She had gone pale, which was its own remarkable thing, given her complexion. He put the phone down. March 7th, 2023, he said. You were on the back patio. You thought I was still at a client meeting. I came home early. She sat down on the sofa. Not a choice exactly. More like her legs made the decision. Dominique. His voice was quieter now. Still even. But quieter. I don't want to talk about the money. The attorneys can talk about the money. I want to talk about something else. She looked at him. Our 10th anniversary, he said. March 2022. I made a reservation at Bacchanalia, the one we went to on the third date. You texted me at 4 in the afternoon that the Vertex board had called an emergency session and you needed to rain check. She was very still. I canceled the reservation. I ate leftover rice. I watched a documentary about bridge engineering because I couldn't make myself watch anything we'd have watched together. He paused. I didn't say anything. I thought she's building something under enormous pressure. People miss anniversaries. Damon, the gala in September 2023, your company's event. I stood outside the main room for 40 minutes because you were talking to the new Vertex CFO and his wife, and you didn't come to get me. I finally went in on my own. You introduced me as this is Damon, he does tech stuff, to 4 people, and then turned back to the conversation. He looked at her steadily. I smiled. Said nice to meet you. Got a glass of water. Stood near the window by myself for the rest of the evening. Her eyes were wet. She didn't blink. I'm not saying this to hurt you, he said. I'm saying it because you asked why I didn't tell you. And the honest answer is that I kept waiting for the woman I married to come back. I kept thinking she was still in there somewhere. I just needed to give her time. Dominique looked at the window, at Atlanta outside it. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of everything she usually used it for. Did she? She said. Come back. Damon was quiet for a moment. Then he opened his desk drawer, took out a document, set it on the desk between them. I wrote you a letter, he said. March 7, 2023. The night I heard you on the patio. I sat in my office until 3 in the morning and I wrote everything down. The truth about Caldwell Briar. The money. Why I kept it from you. What I wanted for us. She looked at the document. I was going to send it, he said. 3 times. I had it open. Ready. What stopped you? I wanted to know if you'd find your way back on your own. Without pressure. Without information you didn't have. He looked at her directly. I wanted to know who you were when you thought I had nothing. She reached for the letter. Her hand was unsteady. He didn't stop her. She read it slowly. He watched her face move through it. The explanation of Caldwell Briar, the blind trusts, the algorithm, the 19 years, the reasons he had kept it hidden. The part about her first Vertex interview, and the call he had quietly arranged, the mentor, the Series D connection. Each door he had opened without telling her, and then the last paragraph. She read it twice. He knew when she hit it because she stopped moving entirely. I was waiting for you to choose us. I kept thinking you would. I still think you might. But I cannot wait in the dark forever hoping you will look at the right direction. I love you enough to show you the truth. I just needed to know first whether the truth would matter to you, or whether you would only see what the truth was worth. She set the letter down very carefully. She didn't say she was sorry. Not yet. You knew, she said instead. You knew I was going to file. You built the clause specifically. I built the clause because you were planning to walk out the door the moment your options vested, he said. You had already called a divorce attorney. You had already decided. I just made sure the cost was what it actually was, instead of what you thought it was going to be. That, she stopped. What? Manipulative? He tilted his head slightly. You were planning to take $400,000 from a man you believed was worth essentially nothing. A man who supported your career for 12 years and paid off $47,000 of your student loans, and moved our home 3 times for your work and never once asked you to acknowledge any of it. She flinched. I didn't rig anything, he said. I just made sure the contract it reflected the actual stakes, which is all any good contract does. Sandra Okafor arrived at the 45th floor at 12:15 with a leather portfolio and the air of someone who had been expecting to be needed. She handed Damon a sealed envelope. He set it on the desk. Divorce papers, he said. I'm filing today. My filing, not yours. Which means the Booker clause doesn't apply to you. You're not forfeiting anything yet. The relief on Dominique's face was immediate and visible, and it told him everything he already knew. She was calculating, even now. Even in this room. Even with the letter sitting on the desk between them. He had expected that, knowing it didn't make it easier to watch. However, he said, and Sandra opened the portfolio to a specific page, my filing requires full financial disclosure under Georgia law. Every asset, every trust, every number. He slid a single page across the desk to her, a summary. Net worth as of November 2024, $847 million. Appreciation of Caldwell-Briar equity during the marriage, March 2012, to present $254 million. Dominique's potential claim under Georgia Community Property Principles, approximately $127 million. Her eyes moved across the numbers. He watched her read them twice. You could fight for it, he said, the full amount. You'd need good attorneys and 2 or 3 years in litigation. It would be expensive and public in every detail, including the phone call to Diane, and the settlement plan you discussed with Howard Finch would become part of the court record. She looked up. Or, he said, you can accept the proposed settlement, which is in the envelope. She didn't reach for it immediately. What's in it? She said. $840,000. Half the current value of the house. Half of both vehicles, half of the savings accounts. He paused. It's what you would have gotten if I was actually the man you told your friends I was. Silence. Then, that's not fair. No, he said, it's not. A fair settlement would be $127 million, which is what you'd have received if you'd been a partner. If you'd treated me with basic respect, if you'd valued our marriage for something other than what you thought you could walk away from it with. She stood up. She moved to the window, stood there with her back to him, looking at Atlanta. He let her stand there. He wasn't in a hurry. The news moved through Caldwell-Briar's offices the way these things always do. Not loudly. In whispers and glances and the particular quality of silence that falls over a room when something significant has just happened and everyone is waiting to see what happens next. Greg Tillman found out from Beverly Pratt, who had overheard enough in the corridor to piece together the outline. He processed it for the rest of the morning, turning it, looking at it from different angles. He had worked alongside Dominique at Vertex for 3 years. He had watched her manage deals and lead teams and navigate corporate politics with a sharpness that he genuinely admired. He had also been standing 6 feet away at the Peninsula Hotel the night before, when she had told 200 people her husband was always in the way, and he had noticed the expression on the husband's face. Not embarrassment. Something flatter than that. Something that had already gone past embarrassment into something else. He understood it now. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, he found Dominique in the break room making coffee. The first time they had been alone since the boardroom. She looked like she had not been sleeping in a way that she was trying to make sure nobody could tell, which meant everyone could tell. He poured himself a cup, stood beside her, let a moment pass. Is it true? He said. You really had no idea? She looked at the wall above the coffee machine. We kept our professional and personal lives separate. Dominique, he said it gently. Not unkindly. You introduced him as an IT guy making $70,000 a year at a Caldwell-Briar event. To Raymond Briar, who had been his best friend since college. She said nothing. I was standing right behind you when you did it, Greg said. Raymond's face didn't change. But I saw what his eyes did. He shook his head slowly. That man has been protecting you from the truth of your own situation for longer than you probably know. She turned to look at him, something dangerous in her expression, and underneath the danger, something worse, recognition. He opened the Vertex door for you, Greg said. Someone told me. Someone who knows how things work here. You and son of Edith's interview. The Morrison Mentorship, the Series D. He paused. She was quiet for a long time. No, she said finally, I didn't. Then you need to sit with that, Greg said. He picked up his coffee, moved toward the door, stopped. My grandmother used to say something. She said, the most dangerous thing in the world is a woman who's so busy proving she doesn't need anyone that she stops noticing who's carrying her. He left her there with that. She stood with her coffee going cold and thought about 12 years. And a letter written at 3 a.m, and a door she had walked through in 2018 that she had never once wondered who had unlocked for her. November 22nd, 2024 was a Friday. Dominique had a major presentation scheduled for 10 a.m. Q4 performance projections for the Vertex integration. The kind of meeting that established whether new acquisitions were going to be easy or complicated. She had been preparing for 2 weeks. She was in the Caldwell Briar parking garage at 8:47 a.m. when a man in a gray suit approached her and said her name and handed her an envelope and said, "You've been served, Miss Webb." 67 pages. She stood next to her Lexus in the parking garage and turned to page 12. Damon's 60% ownership stake in Caldwell Briar Capital, currently valued at $847 million. Page 23. The blind trusts. The shell corporations, the SEC filings from 2005, page 34. The appreciation during the marriage, $254 million. Community property, page 51. The proposed settlement, $840,000. She stood there long enough that the parking garage lights cycled through 2 full automatic rotations. Then she went upstairs. The presentation was, by common account, the worst thing Dominique Webb had ever delivered in a professional setting. She lost her place twice, cited the wrong quarter. At one point said Q3 when she meant Q1 and couldn't find her correction for 30 seconds that felt like a full geological era. Beverly Pratt watched her with the careful expression of someone deciding how much sympathy to allocate. Raymond called a recess at 11:15, told her gently to take a moment. She went to the bathroom on the 43rd floor, locked the stall, sat down on the closed lid and put her face in her hands. She thought about $847 million. She thought about the JCPenney shirt. She thought about the Honda Accord she had internally rolled her eyes at for 4 years. She thought about the night she had told Diane, in a voice full of casual cruelty, that she needed someone who operated at her level. She thought about the man who had written 3 pages about how much he loved her at 3 a.m, and then spent 14 months waiting to see if she would come back to him on her own. She sat in that bathroom stall for 23 minutes. Then she washed her face, fixed her lipstick, walked back out, because that was also who she was, whatever else was true. Over the next 3 weeks, she consulted 4 attorneys. They all told her versions of the same thing. She had a legitimate claim to the community property appreciation. The case would take 2 to 3 years. Legal fees would run past $2 million. And every piece of the story, the patio phone call, the Howard Finch conversations, the Peninsula Hotel night, would become public record. Her second attorney, a sharp woman named Regina Cole who charged $780 an hour, put it plainly on December 3rd. Your husband is offering you $840,000 to walk away clean. That's an insult relative to what you're owed. But you are a senior executive at a company your husband owns. If the full story becomes public, and it will, in litigation, it always does, your professional reputation takes damage that money cannot fix. So I'm supposed to accept less than 1% of what I'm legally entitled to. I'm saying you need to decide what you value more, the money or the narrative. She sent a counteroffer, $15 million, mutual NDAs, clean and quiet. Damon's response came back in 22 hours, $840,000, final. See you in court or sign the settlement. That was it. No negotiation. No softening. She held that response in her hands and understood, for the first time, that there was no version of this where she won. Not because he had beaten her, but because she had already lost, 14 months ago, sitting on a patio in Decatur laughing about dead weight, while the man who had loved her since a sunflower dress in Austin sat in the kitchen in the dark and decided what he was going to do about it. On a Sunday evening in December, she drove to Baltimore. She had not told anyone she was going. She did not entirely understand why she was going, except that she had been awake for most of the previous 3 nights thinking about something Greg Tillman had said. About carrying. About who was carrying whom. Adrienne Webb lived in a row house in West Baltimore that she had owned for 30 years. She was 64 years old. She had a garden that she tended with the same precision her son plied to financial models. She was not particularly surprised to see Dominique on her doorstep. She had a way of not being surprised by things. She made tea, set it on the table between them. She did not bring up the money. She did not bring up Caldwell Bria. She did not ask about the divorce or the clause or the settlement. She talked about Damon. The way mothers talk about the children were not performed for an audience, specific, small, real. He's called me every Sunday for as long as I can remember, she said. Even when he was traveling, even when things were complicated, she wrapped both hands around her mug. Every week for 12 years he told me about you, what you were working on. Something you had said that made him laugh, a problem you were trying to solve. She looked at Dominique steadily. Every single week, he talked about you like you were the most interesting person he had ever met. Dominique looked at the table. He didn't tell me much about the difficulties, Adrienne said. That's not his way. But I could hear it the last couple years. Something quieter. Something careful. She paused. I knew something had changed. I didn't know what. Dominique sat in Adrienne Webb's kitchen for an hour and a half. She drove home alone. She pulled into a parking lot 3 blocks from their house in Decatur and sat in her car for a very long time. The kind of time where you're not thinking in complete sentences, where it's just images, just moments, just the specific of the specific things you did, she cried. Not because of the money, not because of the clause. Because a man had called his mother every Sunday for 12 years and talked about her. Because he had written 3 pages at 3 in the morning about a future he still wanted to build with her. Because he had opened every door she had walked through and never once put his name on the frame. Because she had looked at that man and seen dead weight. And somewhere in the parking lot 3 blocks from the house she was about to lose, Dominique Webb understood that the worst thing she had done was not the phone call to Diane. Was not the plan to minimize his settlement. Was not the wine at the peninsula or the comments at the gala or the years of small and careless diminishments. The worst thing she had done was not see him. When he was right there, the whole time, right there. The restaurant was called Spago, Beverly Hills, January 2025. The kind of place where the lit designed to make everyone look like they had never made a single mistake in their entire lives. Warm and golden and forgiving. The menu had no prices on the version they handed to guests, which was either a courtesy or a warning depending on who you were. Damon had been coming here for 11 years. The maitre d' knew his name. Not because Damon was loud about who he was. Because quiet people who come consistently and tip well and never cause problems become, over time, the people a room is built around without anyone noticing when it happened. The annual Caldwell Bria board dinner was always January. Always here. Always the same long table in the private room with the garden view. 40 people. Board members and senior executives and their guests, if they had them. Dominique sat near the middle of the table. Alone, present without a companion, which in that room amounted to the same thing. Her boyfriend of 2 months, a vice president at a competing firm, someone who wore good suits and talked about his workout routine and had seemed initially like exactly the kind of person she was supposed to be with now, had ended things the week before. Too much baggage, he said. The situation with your husband is a lot, and your judgment given everything seems questionable. He had said this over a $60 salad. She had paid for her own. So she sat at the Spago table in a deep green dress she had bought specifically for this evening, structured, off the shoulder. The kind of thing you wear when you need armor and you need it to look like confidence. She looked composed. She was not composed, but she had learned, over 22 years in corporate rooms, how to make those two things look identical from the outside. Damon sat at the far end of the table. He had not brought anyone either. He wore a dark navy suit she hadn't seen before. He looked rested in a way she was finding difficult to look at directly. Not because she resented it. Because she understood it, he had set something down. something heavy he had been carrying for a very long time. Now he stood in his own life like a man who had remembered what a full breath felt like. She could not say the same. Raymond made the usual remarks about the year's numbers. Caldwell-Briar had grown assets under management by 23%. 3 acquisitions successfully integrated. 2 new investment theses in development. Standard board dinner language that meant everything to the people in the room. Then Damon stood. He raised his champagne glass. I want to thank everyone here for another year of work that actually means something. Not just to the balance sheet, to the companies we back and the people inside them. He paused. I also want to acknowledge something many of you already know. My wife Dominique and I are in the process of divorcing. It has been a hard stretch of time. I'm grateful we've both handled it with professionalism. He looked briefly down the table in her direction. Dominique is a genuinely talented executive and a strong addition to the Vertex integration team. I have full confidence in her work, and I'm glad she's here. He sat down. Clean, generous, not one word that could be turned against him. The table applauded. Conversations restarted. Glasses refilled. Dominique sat still and felt something she did not entirely have a name for. Not gratitude, though it was shaped like gratitude. Underneath it was something sharper. The specific discomfort of being seen clearly by someone who had every reason to look away and had chosen, instead, to say something kind. Cruelty she could have handled. Cruelty gave you something to push against. This she did not know what to do with. After the dessert and the coffee and the gradual dissolving of the formal seating, she found him. He was on the terrace, alone, bourbon, looking out at the garden, which was lit from below with soft uplighting that made ordinary plants look like something from a different world. He heard her come through the door but didn't turn. She stood beside him, not close, just beside. For a moment neither of them spoke. The garden made small sounds. Leaves. A fountain somewhere beyond the edge of the light. You're making me look worse, she said, by being nice. He turned to look at her. I'm being nice because I meant what I said. You meant it. You're good at your job. That was never the problem. She looked at the garden. Then what was? He turned back toward the lights. Let a moment pass. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, not angry. The way things sound when the emotion is burned off and what's left is just the true shape. You decided what I was worth, he said. And then you never revisited that decision. Not once. You had more information about companies in your portfolio than you ever sought about the person sleeping next to you. She didn't argue. You told Diane I was dead weight, he said. You planned your settlement strategy like I was a vendor you were negotiating down. You poured wine on me in front of 200 people and told them the adults were working. He paused. And in all the weeks since you found out who I actually am, not once have you called me to say you were sorry for how you treated me. Every conversation we've had has been about what you stand to lose, not about who you lost. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were wet. She was not going to cry at a Caldwell-Briar dinner. She had made that decision in the car and she was holding to it. I know, she said. What do you know? That I treated you badly. For a long time. Before I knew. Before any of the money was part of it. She pressed her lips together. I drove to Baltimore last month, to your mother's house. She made tea and talked about you for an hour, and she didn't say one word about money or settlements or what any of this means legally. She stopped. She talked about Sunday phone calls, 12 years of them. She said you talked about me every week. He was quiet. I sat in a parking lot 3 blocks from our house after that, she said. For a long time, just sitting there. She shook her head. I wasn't thinking about the settlement then. I was thinking about you. Specific things, not the big things. The small ones. The way you'd already have coffee made when I came downstairs. The way you'd look at me across a room at these events, like I was the only interesting thing in it. Even the years when I was treating you like furniture. She looked at the garden. I know it's late. I know saying it now looks like strategy. I know I don't have standing to ask you to believe it's real. She paused. But it is. Damon turned his glass slowly in his hand. Once, twice. Dominique, his voice was quiet now. The night I heard you on the patio. The thing that hurt most wasn't the plan, wasn't the attorney or the 400,000 or the timeline. He stopped. Then it was how free you sounded. Completely unburdened. Like leaving me wasn't a loss you were carrying. It was a problem you were managing. She closed her eyes. I loved you, he said. Like someone who had chosen you all the way. And you were on the other side of a glass door talking about me like a line item in a budget you were trying to cut. I know, she said. So when you say it's real now, he looked at her directly. I believe you. I think you did sit in that parking lot. I think something shifted. He set his glass down on the railing. But I needed you to choose me before you knew what choosing me was worth. And you didn't. You can be sorry about that. You should be. But that can't be undone. She nodded, very small. Then Raymond appeared at the terrace door. He looked at both of them. His timing was not accidental. Damon knew because Raymond had been watching the door for the past 10 minutes. Raymond said, careful and gentle, "Can I borrow you for a moment? There's someone I want you to meet about the Q2 roadmap." She looked at Damon. He nodded once. She went inside. Raymond watched her go, then stepped out onto the terrace and stood beside Damon. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "She meant it?" Raymond said finally. "Whatever she said." "I know," Damon said. "Does it help?" Damon looked at the garden. The fountain sound was steady and unhurried and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened on this terrace. "A little," he said, "and a little, no." Raymond put a hand on his shoulder for 1 second, then went back inside. Damon stood alone and finished his bourbon and thought about David Booker. Not the clause, not the legal mechanism, Booker himself, the man. The way he had sat in a hospital room in his last weeks, very thin, still sharp, and said, "The worst contracts are not the ones that trap people. The worst ones are the ones that show people who they really are. And the people don't like what they see, and they spend the rest of their lives blaming the contract." Damon had built the Booker clause, to be honest, about consequences, about the gap between what people say they value and what they actually choose when the stakes are real. Dominique had looked into that gap and found herself in it. That was not something he had done to her. That was something she had shown herself. And the grief of that, the real grief, not the clean kind, not the kind that wraps up into lessons and better choices, was that he had loved her enough to build the whole thing. Had loved her enough to spend 14 months setting every piece exactly where it needed to be. Because love without honesty in it is not love. It is just comfort. And comfort is not the same thing as home. He went back inside. Dominique signed the settlement agreement on February 3rd, 2025. $840,000. Half the house. Half of both vehicles. Half the savings accounts. Sandra Okafor brought the paperwork to Dominique's attorney's office in Midtown and sat across the table while Dominique read through the final version page by page. Her attorney said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said across 3 weeks of back and forth that had gone exactly nowhere. Dominique signed on page 41. Her hand was steady. She walked out into a February afternoon in Atlanta, cold enough for a coat, bright enough to make you squint. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then she got in her car and drove to work. Because that was also who she was, whatever else was true about her. She moved forward, she always had. It was the one thing about herself she had never lost, even when she had lost sight of almost everything else. The divorce was finalized on February 28th. Sandra had ensured the records were sealed, no press coverage. Both parties had agreed on that without negotiation. It was the one thing they had agreed on without negotiation. The next 8 months were the strangest of Dominique's professional life. She showed up to Caldwell Briar every day and did her job. Did it well because competence was not something she had ever needed to fake. She managed the Vertex integration. She sat in meetings. She gave presentations that were back to the standard she had built her career on. Because the disaster of November 22nd had been a one-time thing, and she had made sure it stayed that way. And twice a week, sometimes 3 times, she would pass Damon in a hallway, or a conference room, or near the elevator bank on the 42nd floor. He was always professional. Always polite. Said good morning. Asked, occasionally, a question about integration timelines with the neutral courtesy of a man who was genuinely interested in the business answer and had no personal charge attached to the question whatsoever. It was, she discovered, possible to be undone by kindness. Not cruelty, kindness. The absence of anything to push against. The complete and steady absence of it, day after day in the same building, in the same elevator, over the same conference table. She had expected anger. She had braced for it. She knew how to handle anger. This she did not know what to do with. In October 2025, she accepted a position in San Francisco. executive vice president operations at a biotech firm, whose growth trajectory reminded her of Vertitex 4 years ago. 720,000 plus equity. Good work, real work. The kind she was built for. She gave Caldwell Prayer 6 weeks' notice. Damon, when Raymond told him, said, "She's right for that role, they're lucky," and meant it, which was the part that stayed with her longer than she expected. She moved in November, a high-floor apartment in Pacific Heights, hardwood floors, a view of the bay through the east windows in the morning light that was genuinely worth the rent. The city was loud in a different register than Atlanta. She learned its rhythms slowly, the way you learn any new place, with patience and low-grade disorientation that eventually becomes something close to belonging. She was building something again. That was real, that mattered. She held on to it. In the meantime, Damon had started returning calls, not all at once, just. Calls that had been going to voicemail for years started getting answered. Invitations he had declined on the basis of preferring invisibility started receiving different answers. The Forbes interview that had been sitting in Sandra's reply pending folder for 9 months got a yes. The profile ran in November 25. The billionaire nobody knew, Damon Webb's 19-year secret, a long piece. The journalist had done real work. It traced the Howard University dorm and the algorithm and the September 2005 partnership agreement and 19 years of Caldwell Breyer's growth through blind trust and a public-facing CEO saying that allowed Dame to remain completely invisible while shaping one of the most consequential private equity firms in the American South. The personal section was brief. He had been married for 12 years, recently divorced. He had maintained pride in his circle doted for reasons both personal and structural, and had simply preferred, for the entirety of his professional life, to let the work be the thing, not the man. There was a photograph. Damon in a light gray suit near the floor-to-ceiling windows of his 45th floor office, Atlanta, behind him. He was turned, looking back at the camera. His expression was settled, the expression of a man who had stopped performing anything and was just standing there, being exactly what he was. By Thursday, the article had been shared 40,000 times. By the following week, 3 business schools had reached out about speaking engagements. Raymond texted a single line. Well, that happened. Damon read the text on a Saturday morning at the charity gala for the Atlanta Environmental Conservation Coalition, where he had been donating significantly for 6 years without anyone connecting his name to the contributions. He put his phone away, looked around the room, and saw a woman in a burnt orange dress standing near the silent auction table, examining a framed photograph with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested in it rather than performing interest. Her hair was natural, short, precisely shaped, no jewelry except small gold studs. She wore flat shoes at a formal gala, which was either a statement or a practical decision, and he immediately wanted to know which. He walked over. "Do you know what species that is?" he asked, nodding at the photograph. "The coral." She looked at him, then the photograph. "Acropora palmata, elkhorn coral. Critically endangered. This reef is off the coast of Florida. I've been there." She paused. "The photograph is 4 years old. That section is about 40% bleached now." "How do you know?" "I surveyed it in March." She looked at him with the mild assessment of someone deciding whether a conversation is worth continuing. "I'm a marine biologist. Coral reef restoration in the Gulf and Atlantic systems." She extended her hand. "Zara Osi, Damon Webb," he said. "Are you here for the auction or the open bar?" "The auction. The conservation grants specifically." Something shifted in her expression, not impressed. Interested. The difference mattered, and he registered it. "Tell me one thing about thermal bleaching that most people get wrong," she said. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "You might actually know something." They talked for an hour and a half. She spoke about her research with the velocity of someone who spends most of their time with people who don't fully follow what she does, perpetually calibrating how deep to go. He kept pace, asked questions that showed he was tracking rather than waiting for his turn. She noticed, he could tell she noticed. At the end of the evening, she wrote her number on the back of a program card. "If you want to see the actual reef sometime," she said, not the photograph. He looked at the number, then at her. "I'd like that." She nodded once. Walked away without looking back. He stood there holding the program card and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not the cold clarity of a plan executing on schedule. not the managed steadiness of a man watching dominoes fall from the right sequence. Something simpler, something that had no strategy in it at all, just wanting. Plain and uncomplicated and completely outside his control. Like a window he had stopped looking out of. And then one day walked past it, and the light was coming through in exactly the right way, and he stopped. And stood there. And looked. They had coffee the following Saturday at a place near her lab in Midtown that she could walk to, which he found immediately appealing in a way he didn't try to analyze. She wore jeans and a yellow sweater and carried a canvas bag with a sea turtle drawing that had seen significant use. She did not know who he was. She had not connected the name Damon Webb to the Forbes article, which had not crossed her corner of the internet, which ran primarily through marine biology journals and ocean conservation newsletters, and the group chat for her research team. He did not mention it. Not because he was hiding. He was done with hiding, but because he wanted, just for a little while, to be the man from the auction who knew something about thermal bleaching. Just that. Nothing attached to it. On their third date, a neighborhood place she liked where the fish was fresh and the noise level let you actually talk, she put her card on the dun table when the check came. He reached for his at the same moment. $73, she said. Split. He looked at that number. 73. He laughed. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere unplanned and doesn't ask permission first. She studied him the way she studied data she hadn't expected. What's funny, that number, he said means something to me. $73. Long story. I have time. He looked at her across the table. The restaurant light was warm. She was just looking at him. No performance. No agenda. Just actually looking, with the full attention of someone who wanted to understand rather than impress. I'll tell you on the 6th date, he said. Why the 6th? Some stories need runway before they land. She considered this seriously, which he appreciated. Okay. She paid her $36.50 without ceremony. 6th date. He told her on the 6th date. They were in his car afterward. The 2015 Honda Accord. He had driven them to Piedmont Park and they had walked for tout and then sat in the parking lot because neither of them was ready to end the afternoon and the car was warm. He started at the beginning. Howard University. The algorithm. Raymond. September 2005. 19 years, the blind trusts, $891 million as of that morning, because markets did not pause for personal reckonings. He told her about Dominique. The sunflower dress in the Austin conference in 12 years, and a letter written at 3 a.m. that he had carried for 14 months without sending. The patio phone call, the Booker clause, the boardroom, the 45th floor, the settlement. He told her about a woman in a burnt orange dress at an auction, looking at elkhorn horn coral with her head tilted to the left. Zara sat in the passenger seat and listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, the radio had moved through 2 full songs. She pulled up the Forbes article on her phone. Read the first 3 paragraphs. Looked at the photograph. Put her phone away. You've been driving this car, she said. Yes. This specific 2015 Honda. Yeah. The whole time. The whole time. She looked at the windshield. A couple walked past with a stroller. A woman jogged with a dog. Ordinary Saturday evening, things happening at their ordinary Saturday pace. Why didn't you tell me sooner, she asked. Not an accusation, a real question. I wanted you to know me before you knew what I was worth, he said. I know how that sounds. It sounds like a lesson you learned the hard way. He didn't say anything. Does it bother you? She asked. That I know now. She thought about it. He appreciated that she didn't answer immediately, that she actually considered it. Probably a little, she said. While I recalibrate. She turned to look at him. But mostly I'm thinking about the fact that you could have been anywhere that Saturday night and you were standing next to a photograph of elkhorn coral, wanting to talk about it. Not performing interest. Actually there. I've supported the foundation for 6 years. I know. That's the point. She looked back at the windshield. People with money perform interest in things. You weren't performing. You were just interested. That's different. She paused. You let me pay $36.50. You insisted. I'm glad you let me. She turned back toward him. It just means we're the same kind of people, which is the only thing I actually care about. He looked at her in the late afternoon light, coming through the windshield of a car he had driven for 10 years because it got him where he needed to go. And felt for the first time in longer than he could accurately account for that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. They were engaged in October 2026. He had not planned the moment. They were at the Botanical Gardens, the same grounds they had walked the afternoon of the sixth date, in the section near the rose beds that Zara liked because the restoration patterns reminded her of reef regeneration. She had been explaining something about root systems and lateral growth, and he had been listening, and then she said something that made him and laughed him after with that expression she had. The one that was just looking. No layers to it, no calculation underneath it. Just her, looking at him like he was exactly what she expected to find there. He stopped walking. She took 2 more steps, stopped, turned back. I want this forever, she looked at the ring, then at him. This being, walking around talking about coral, arguing about data, splitting every check even though the math doesn't require it. She laughed, the loud one, the one that was entirely hers and made no attempt to be anything else. Will you marry me, he said. She looked at him, steady and warm and completely certain. Yes, she said, obviously yes. They married in March 2027, Savannah, Georgia, the city where David Booker had grown up. A small chapel near Forsyth Park that a friend of Adrian's had attended for 40 years, 40 guests. Adrian in the front row, in a deep plum dress she had bought herself, which Damon noticed and said nothing about and loved her for. As best man, composed for the first 90% of the ceremony, and then not, which was also noticed and also said nothing about. The reception cost $18,000, which Zara had proposed as a ceiling with supporting data. He had agreed without argument, and then quietly donated an additional $20,000 to her research lab under the name of the Atlantic Elkhorn Coral Restorations Initiative, which she discovered via email from her department chair on the second day of their honeymoon. She showed him the phone. You said 18,000, she said. For the wedding, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. That is a very specific loophole. I learned from someone who was very good at contracts. She shook her head, but she was smiling. He knew by now that the head shake and the smile were not opposites in her. They were the same thing. The thing she did when she was more pleased than she wanted to immediately admit. Their honeymoon was in Napa Valley, California. A small inn with a private porch looking out at rows of grapevines running up into the afternoon light. They cooked in the small kitchen some evenings, walked the vineyards in the mornings. Zara had bought 3 research papers she intended to annotate, which she did not finish. On the 3rd evening, Zara was in the shower. Damon sat at the small writing table near the window. In front of him were 2 things. The first was a postcard that had arrived through Sandra's office, forwarded with a note in Sandra's handwriting that said simply, "She asked for it to reach you." San Francisco postmark. Dominique's handwriting, precise, slightly left slanting, the handwriting of a woman who had been told her letters were too large and had spent decades compressing them. "I'm sorry. Not for the money. For everything else. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be." He read it once. The second thing was his laptop, and on the laptop the folder labeled March 7, 2023. He opened it. Read the letter from the beginning. All 3 pages. The explanation of Caldwell Breyer, the blind trusts, the algorithm, the reasons he had kept it from her, what he had wanted for them. The part about watching her succeed, the part about the sunflower dress, the part about believing, for years and then past years, that she would find her way back. And the last paragraph. I was waiting for you to choose us. I kept thinking you would. I still think you might. But I cannot wait in the dark forever, hoping you will look in the right direction. I love you enough to show you the truth. I just needed to know first whether the truth would matter to you, or whether you would only see what the truth was worth. He sat with it for a while. Outside the window, the grapevines was doing what grapevines do in the last light of a California evening, holding it, being patient with it, working in ways that weren't visible from the outside until one day, without announcement, they were. He thought about Booker, specifically about the afternoon in the hospital room, the last good week, when Booker had said something Damon had written down and read back many times since. Success doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. He had built a company on that, had tested a marriage against it, had watched 2 people, including himself, be revealed by it in ways that were not always comfortable to look at directly. He had kept secrets because he was afraid. That was true. He had told himself it was protection, and it was, but underneath the protection was fear. The fear of being seen for what he had and then not knowing, ever, which part of him the other person was actually choosing. Zara had chosen him in a burnt orange dress with a canvas tote bag at a charity auction, before she knew any number attached to his name. That was the gift. That was the thing he had stopped believing was possible, and then found in the most ordinary room in the most ordinary way. Just by showing up and being curious and letting himself be seen. He took the postcard. He took the printed letter. The small fireplace in the corner of the room had been left with wood and matches, the inn's optimistic provision for a honeymoon suite in late March. He had not touched it until now. He lit the set both papers in, watched them catch, watched the edges go first, then the centers, then the words, all of them, his and hers, the apology and the explanation, and hope that had come too early and the regret that had come too late, all of it going to ash in a fireplace in a valley full of grapevines on the third evening of his honeymoon. Not in anger. He had let the anger go a long time ago, somewhere between January and February, somewhere between the Spago Terrace and the day he watched Dominique walk out of the Caldwell Breer building, for the last time with a box of her things and her back straight and her head up, because that was also who she was. Not in forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness was something that happened slowly, in private, over time, without announcement. He didn't know yet how far along it was. He suspected it was further along than he realized. That was usually how it worked. Just closing. The way you close a book when you've reached the last page and held it for a moment and then set it down. Not because it didn't matter, because it's done. Because holding it open after the story has ended doesn't change what the story was. Zavra came out of the bathroom in the worn sweatshirt she favored on evenings when no one was watching. She saw the small fire, saw the thinning smoke of paper. Looked at him. Was that important? She asked. He watched the last of it go. Yes, he said. But it's not anymore. She came and sat on the arm of the chair beside him, not making anything of it, just sat. He put his arm around her. She rested her head briefly against his shoulder. They sat there while the fire finished what fires do. Outside, the grapevines held the last of the light as the day let go of it. Not all at once, but in degrees, the way good things go. The way anything worth having eventually becomes so familiar you stop noticing how much you needed it. Until the sky was something else entirely, and the rows of vines were just shapes in the dark, and the room behind them was warm, and there was nowhere else in the world either of them needed to be. In June 2027, 3 months after the wedding, Damon announced the Booker Scholarship Fund, $127 million, for first-generation college students from low-income households in Atlanta, Baltimore, and Birmingham. Named after David Booker, attorney, mentor, witness to a September afternoon in 2005 when 2 young men signed a piece of paper and started building something neither of them could fully see yet. Damon attended the announcement, said a few words, talked about a dorm room and an algorithm, and a man who had taken one phone call and made it to the right person at the right moment and changed the direction of everything. He did not talk about the marriage. He did not talk about the settlement or the clause or the wine on the khaki pants. He talked about what it means to be taken seriously before you have given anyone a reason to. About the one act of attention from someone who doesn't have to pay attention. About how that single thing, unremarkable from the outside, can be the foundation under everything that comes after. A journalist asked what he wanted the fund's legacy to be. He thought about it. I want 47 students a year to walk into a room and feel like they belong, he said. Not because they've proven it yet, because someone decided in advance that they might. In San Francisco, Dominique read the announcement on a Tuesday morning at her desk, 7:30 a.m. Bay visible through the east windows in the early summer silver light. She read the amount, $127 million. She looked at that number for a long time. She knew what it was. Not because she was calculating anymore. She had stopped calculating, had set that habit down somewhere between the parking lot in December and the morning she signed the settlement and felt, underneath the loss, something unexpected. Something that felt distantly, like relief. Like putting down something she hadn't known she was carrying. She knew what the number was because she had spent enough time in honest conversation with herself to understand exactly where it had come from and what it meant that he had given it away. Not kept it, not invested it, not leveraged it into something larger, given it. To kids who were sitting in dorm rooms right now with full scholarships and no margin for error and the hunger of people who know exactly how far they have come and how far they still have to go. Kids like he had been. She sat with that for a while. The bay did its quiet morning thing outside her window. A ferry moved across the water, slow and steady and going somewhere. She was not unhappy. That was real, and she held onto it as evidence of something. The San Francisco life was real. The work was good work. She was rebuilding herself the way you rebuild anything that has been taken apart. Carefully, with attention to what was structural and what was just habit. Keeping the parts that were actually load-bearing and letting go of the ones that were just filling space. But on that Tuesday morning in June, she felt the exact weight of the thing she had lost. Not the money. The money had stopped mattering the way it used to matter, which was itself a kind of answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. What she felt was the specific shape of the absence. A man who had loved her with his whole attention, who had written 3 pages at 3 a.m. because he was still hoping, who had opened every door she walked through and never put his name on the frame, who had taken $127 million and given it to children who reminded him of at 22, hungry and capable, and needing someone to open the first door. She had not known she had it, any of it, not the doors, not the attention, not the love that showed up in the small things rather than the large announcements. That was what the money could not measure, and what no settlement could ever replace. She turned back to her work, because that was who she was, whatever else was true. She moved, she built, she took what she understood and carried it forward. That had always been the thing about her that was real and would remain real regardless of every other thing that changed. It was, she realized, the thing Damon had seen in her first, before the EVP title, before the stock options, before the $680,000 salary and the Dior bags in the corner office. He had seen a woman in a sunflower dress in Austin who asked better questions than anyone else in the room, and he had thought, there she is. She had just stopped being her for a while. She was finding her way back. Damon drove home from the scholarship announcement in the 2015 Honda Accord. Zara had texted, "How did it go?" He texted back, "Good." Then pulled into the driveway of the house they had bought together in Inman Park. A neighborhood with old trees, an unhurried character that had been accumulating for decades before either of them arrived. He sat in the car for a moment. The quiet that comes after something is finished. Not empty quiet, full quiet. The kind that has weight to it because it has replaced something heavier. He thought about 47 students. He thought about a dorm room that smelled like textbooks and ambition, and the particular faith of people who have not yet learned to be afraid of what they want. He thought about David Booker pulling up a chair in a lecture hall in 2005 and asking a 22-year-old kid from Baltimore a real question and actually waiting for the real answer. He got out of the car, walked to the front door. Inside, Zara was on the couch with a journal article, a highlight, her feet tucked under her, completely at home in the way she was completely at home everywhere she decided to be. She looked up when he came in. "How do you feel?" she asked. He thought about it, gave it the honest attention it deserved, like something landed where it was supposed to, he said. She nodded, went back to her article. He made 2 cups of tea, set one beside her. She said thanks without looking up, which was exactly right, which was the thing about her he had known from the 3rd date and every day since. She never performed gratitude. She just felt it quietly and trusted that he knew. He sat down. The house was warm. The trees outside were doing what Atlanta trees do in June. Everything, all at once, full and uncared and completely certain of what they are. The street was quiet. Someone's sprinkler ran in the yard next door. A car passed slowly. He drank his tea. He did not think about the 45th floor or the JCPenney shirt or the wine on the khakis or the recording on his phone or the letter in a fireplace in Napa. He thought about none of it, because it was done. Because some chapters close, and what matters after they close is not the chapter but what you do with what it taught you. How you carry the weight of it. Not as burden, not as trophy, but as knowledge. The hard-won, specific, irresistible kind that you can unblank by living through something you'd not have chosen and coming out the other side still recognizably yourself. He was still himself. That was the thing. After all of it, the 19 years of invisibility, the 12 years of marriage, the 14 months of planning, the boardroom, and the terrace, and the parking lot and the fireplace, he was still himself. Still the kid from Baltimore who wanted to understand how things worked. Still the man who drove a 2015 Honda because it got him where he needed to go. Still the person who gave money to coral reefs and first-generation students and sat on a couch on a Tuesday evening drinking next to a woman whom half of every check and highlighted marine biology journals and made him laugh in parking lots. Still himself. That was what David Booker had been trying to tell him. Not that success reveals character exactly, but that the whole long road of it, the building and the hiding and the losing and the choosing, is just one long process of finding out who you actually are when everything else falls away. And who you are, at the end of all of it, is the only thing that was ever really yours to keep. He finished his tea. Outside the June's going light was the way it goes in Atlanta, slow and warm and reluctant, like it knows something worth staying for. The trees held it as long as they could, then let it go. The way everything that has run its course eventually lets go, gently, without drama. The way things end when they have been exactly what they needed to be, for exactly as long as they needed to be it, and not one moment more.